And education in Nigeria has long been seen as a key, of course, to national progress. But the sector continues to face significant challenges, particularly at the subnational level, from inadequate funding to infrastructural deficits. Many people, including state governments, grapple with how to provide quality education to their citizens. Every year, there are budgetary allocations made to the education sector as to other sectors of every economy in our country. The question is, how significant have these been? What are the challenges? What are the issues to consider? What are the sympathies to express? The recent stance by the National Assembly to cut JAMB off government's grants raises concerns among other challenges. What should be the focus for 2025 and beyond? Professor Hope Eghagha joins us this morning. He's former Commissioner Higher Education in Delta State, and he is lecturer at English Department of the University of Lagos. He joins us via Zoom from Warri. Thank you so much, Prof, for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Program.
Well, Prof, education. Everyone seems to know that it is good for us, but when occasionally we look at it, we're wondering whether or not the academic education in particular that we get in our country, that's going to the younger students, primary, secondary, even tertiary institutions, whether or not they are relevant to the realities of today and the challenges coming up tomorrow. What's your outlook?
Well, thank you. That is a valid question which you've asked, interrogating the nature of education, the type of education that we have, the curriculum which we currently have in the country across all levels. How relevant is the curriculum to our everyday experience? Does it give the child, the graduate, access to work? These are valid questions. There are two ways of looking at this. One is to provide education for its own sake. The fact that people should be educated, should have access to knowledge. The other is to have knowledge that can make them relevant in society. You know that at the tertiary level, education is there, and it prepares you for life. You may take a degree in English, end up as a human resource a person. So, but when you look at the current trends in the country, in the world, global trends, it has become necessary to tailor education in certain directions. All right, we tweak it, and that is what that's what NUC is currently doing in the universities, to make sure that the programs which we run are beneficial both to the students, to the graduate, and to the system itself, to Nigeria. After taking a degree and you step into the world, we're asking the question, are you well prepared? Okay? So what it means is that from the very basic level, we must begin to interrogate the curricula that we run to ensure that it is relevant, one, culturally, socially, economically. When I talk about cultural relevance, you study and you are able to fit into the society that you are in. You have a basis. We don't impose alien cultures on you. And so when you leave, you become a monster. So we really need to retweak the curriculum that we run in the educational system.
Okay, so that's a start. But then what's the challenge? A good number of times we've been told that every tier of government in our country has its duty in individual relevances to education. Of course, state governments also from time to time come up with universities for the state, the federal universities, private universities, and all of that. As a former commissioner, Prof, what do you see as the opportunities for state governments, and what is it that has hindered them over time?
As far as I know, a lot of states have established tertiary institutions. They have polytechnics being managed by the states. We have colleges of education. We also have universities. In fact, some are complaining that we now have a glut of universities. I don't agree. The sheer number of students who apply to get a position, get a place in the university, and who are denied is amazing. It's worrisome. All right, you find some people trying to get into the university 3-4 times. Then the other level, you don't get your choice. You want to study medicine, and you're told the cutoff is 300 marks, and you score 280, so you are denied medicine. No. So the states, as far as I'm concerned, are creating tertiary institutions. Often the access is more expensive than the federal. We don't pay for tuition in the federal, but at the state level, you have to pay something. However, okay, let me make this point. We need to have enough tertiary institutions in order to broaden access, to have more people gain education. And this ties with the very first point we made about the content of the education curriculum. If you simply produce graduates who are not relevant, who depend on the government to work, then they would graduate and become frustrated. And those are the people who promote the narrative, education as scam. All right? And when they say that, they mean that after taking a degree, you don't get a job, either with government or the private sector, because we have so many graduates now from all disciplines. Yes, we need to produce the graduates, but we must also need to provide for them in terms of employment opportunities, give them skills. And that is the reason in the university system, we are talking about entrepreneurial skills. When you graduate or when you're in the university, you are taught how to make good for yourself without getting a blue-collar job. All right? So what the state should do is to ensure that the professional courses are available, and the other courses are also available. Produce enough doctors, produce enough medical scientists, produce enough lawyers, produce enough manpower. We still don't have enough doctors in the country. We don't. Okay, so the states must continue to do this, but also ensure that education is a social welfare service to the people. We shouldn't price it out of the reach of the common man. All right, where, as we find in the private universities, to take a degree in medicine, you're paying millions. Take a degree in law, you're paying millions. There should be access for all the Nigerian youth. These young men and women did not ask to come into this world. We brought them into the world. And now they should be educated. They should have the opportunity.
Well, Prof, one of the major issues that's been in the news for a little bit is that of the National Assembly's Joint Committee on Finance threatening to cut JAMB's federal government grants in the 2025 budget if the agency cannot provide adequate justifications for its expenditures. What do you make of that? How helpful do you see that being in the entire context?
Okay, let us just see this as checks and balances, all right, between the executive arm and the legislative arm. In other words, interrogating the expenditure profile. Let's just look at it from that perspective. But there should be a background to this. If you recall, when the incumbent registrar took over, I think about 2015 or 2016, he was praised for remitting so much to the federal government. And indeed, it was said that in 1 year, he remitted what the whole of JAM in its 1978 to 2015 had not remitted in those many years, but he did. Okay. Last year, he got a subvention of 6.5 billion and remitted back to the government 4 billion naira. Now, on the face of it, that is commendable. Indeed, when it came out that JAMB had remitted so much money to the government, two schools of thought. One, are you making profits from these poor, hungry students? All right. But when Professor Eghagha took over, the then president slashed the fees from 5,000 to 3,500 naira for JAMB candidates. All right. Of course, we know when we run parastatals, there are some models. There are different models. There's the non-profit models. There's the break-even. Then there's a profit model, and then there is there is a merger of all of these. Okay, all these four models. Education comes under non-profit. You're not supposed to make a profit. It's a social service to the people. It's a welfare service to the people, especially as provided by the government. Now, what the National Assembly seems to be interrogating at this time is the amount of money budgeted for feeding. 1.1 billion or thereabout. In other words, if we gave you 6.5 billion, why should you spend 1 billion feeding who? Feeding the candidates? All right. So it's an oversight function which they're doing. In my mind, the federal governments have a responsibility towards the people. All right. And if you cut off subvention, what would you be doing for the people? What you should do is to trim it, in my view. All right. If there are leakages, if there are certain areas where you think that expenditure is too high, bloated, you can then slash it. But to cut it off completely is not acceptable. We don't advise that.
Okay.
I believe that with this kind of intervention from the National Assembly, Professor Eghagha, who is known for his prudence, will go back to the drawing board, and I think there will be an amicable settlement, or there should be an amicable settlement.
Well, a number of people will question that, Prof. In the meantime, there is this other, issue, angle to this whole conversation. Most of the time when we talk about education in Nigeria, we talk about academic education. But then there are other needs, and particularly given what you also know, evolving economies all over the world, new needs are coming up, consequently new skills are required. But it would seem like even our academic education, or even general education apparatus, isn't looking in that direction. Take a look at technology, for instance. I'm not sure how many schools, be it formal or informal, are offering enough skills to people to get them ready for that future that is already here. So in terms of technical education, skill acquisition, do you see a need for us to integrate it in some way into national education curriculum that will be binding on every state, federal and local government, or even private schools in the country?
As you rightly said, the future is here. And with the handsets, all right, every student in Nigeria should have access to AI, to new technology. All right, that's on the face of it. Last month, I gave a keynote where I said we now have students who are in the university, who are in different disciplines, but they are now content creators. Oh yes. What they are studying in the university is not directly related to what they're doing, but they are content creators. So what should the tertiary institutions do? What should the secondary school students do? I remember about 1998 where I attended the book launch, and an industrialist was complaining at the time that it didn't really make sense to me at the time when he said it. But with the benefit of hindsight now, he made a very valid point. Well, he said, look, In Nigeria of today, if you wanted to build your house, you wouldn't find a Nigerian mason or those guys who do the POP. They are mainly from Benin, across the republic, across the border here. In other words, our young men don't find such things attractive anymore, such vocation. Under the 6334 educational system, which we ran for some years and jettisoned, at the secondary school level, after the first 6 years, then 3 years, the next 3 years, you diversify. You go into skill acquisition, so you can survive without paid employment. But everybody seems to have gone in one direction, and we too have followed the people. Everybody wants a degree, all right? So we will need to integrate the current trends in education into our curriculum across the levels, across the board. From primary, I do know that the current program being developed by NUC keys into this narrative. Okay, we are adopting that. Of course, I know that in Unilab we are doing something on AI, content creation, narratives from different perspectives, meta narratives, and all. So it should be broad. There should be a deliberate effort towards this. The primary, the secondary, the tertiary. Now, currently in Unilag, we are running the first semester virtually. All right, we are running the first semester virtually. We are teaching our students at home. Because at this time, they cannot return to the campuses or to the campus because renovations are taking place everywhere. So, if we can achieve that this first semester, as we did during COVID, then it means it can become a way of life. So we can run a hybrid. But the students have to be prepared for that. Do we have the infrastructure to support it? How many hours in a day do we have access to power supply? We are teaching, and then where there is a class of 100, you have only 60 students, and the others tell you that they couldn't power their battery, they couldn't power their devices. All right, so it's good. It's a concatenated system. It is linked. Everything is linked. We must, if we are going in that direction, ensure that there is regular power supply in the country. But it is the way to go in order to prepare our students for the demands of the 20th century, of the 21st century. We need it. While some are keen into it already, we find that some remain in the background, especially when you travel to the rural areas of the country. All right? They don't have power. The worst infrastructure in those areas are the primary schools, the secondary schools. All right? They're deserted. When you get there, you see a primary school. It wasn't like that. It seems everybody says, yes, this school can be in this school. It's a school. It doesn't matter. It's a primary school. Come on. That is a terrible policy. In my view, every state, starting with the federal government, there should be a policy on the models. What should a school look like? Schools should have power 24 hours. Schools are a laboratory for the future. And when we deny them power supply, they can't have access to the gadgets which you need in the 21st century. You are denying them the future. And that is tragic.
And I couldn't agree more, because just yesterday we were showing visuals of the University of Lagos when we started the program. What I did not tell Ayo is that this is one of the professors, Professor Hope Eghagha was one of the professors who molded me while I was at the University of Lagos. It's a real delight, Prof, to be speaking with you on Sunrise Daily this morning. I want to ask you, I mean, you have also served, I mean, you left the gown once, and you came to town and you served as a commissioner for higher education in your native Delta state. And I'm sure that then you would have witnessed, as someone who has practiced, you know, teaching in a higher institution, now coming to the other side to witness the challenges with putting policies in place and seeing them implemented. For you, where do you think the real problem lies? Is it with the policies that we have, or is it with the implementation of those who have to carry it out, within the walls of the academia?
Thank you, Mokbe. We are proud of you, the Department of English. Every time we see you on television, we are proud to say that's our product. Now, to get to your question, you see, we are not short of policies in the country. If you go to the books, I've been involved, as you said, as a teacher, then as an administrator, we are not short of policies. The problem is implementation. All right, we run a system that seems to be short in memory. We run a system in which a part does not seem to know that it is part of a process. It's a chain. All right, when you are producing half-baked primary school graduates, if I call them that, or secondary school graduates, you don't know that what you're doing affects the university. Garbage in, garbage out. So they are all linked. Take, for instance, where it is proposed, the books state that to take a secondary school living certificate, you need competence in this area. Somebody looks at it, but you don't need this in this now, and then they just twist the whole thing, distort the whole thing, and we just move on. All right? So we don't have the backbone that ensures continuity in policies. Those at the implementation level seem to have a different perspective from those who initiated it. But we do know that there are different committees between the Ministries of Education and the tertiary institutions and secondary school teachers and all. Yes, they meet joint meetings every year, but there is a disturbing disconnect between what is on the ground and what is proposed. So, what we need is an integrated system where everybody is aware that, look, you are just a point in the chain, and if you feed in garbage in 2020, in 2026 we'll begin to reap the repercussions. I give you a clear instance. I started teaching in Unilab in 1985, and about a year or two later, those set of graduates I'm mentioning on the state now who were promoted without passing from one level to the other, they then found themselves in the university system. And as a teacher grading essays, for the first time, I noticed a steep decline in the level of expression. All right? Well, just, okay, let's just produce them. Let's churn them out so people don't fail anymore. All right? We are not saying people must fail, but what we are saying is that you must impart enough knowledge, teach them well enough to pass. Not to say someone who scores 20% average in all the system, oh, just move to the next year. No. All right. So the implementation is faulty, but we are the ones. It's Nigerians. We blame government for everything, but as a school principal, you have obligations. As a lecturer, you have obligations. As a vice chancellor, you have obligations to keep the integrity of the system. The Federal Ministry of Education, the State Ministry of Education cannot go around like a policeman to every corner. All of us have a responsibility in this. Even parents. Some parents look for the so-called miracle centers to pay for their children to pass. In other words, if you are not going to coach your child so the child will have enough education, you are paying to the managers of the miracle centers so that they can help your child to write exams. Come on, that is part of the process of the problem. So let us use a mirror and look at ourselves. For those who want their children to move from primary 4 to the secondary school, that's part of the problem.
Yeah, I was going to ask you a question on that, because there was controversy recently as to whether or not there should be an age for entry into universities. The federal government initially said, through the Ministry of Education, had said that 18 was the age of entry, and the new minister has come to say, well, that is no longer necessary. I'm just wondering, as a practitioner, somebody who's seen the side of policy and also the side of implementation, do you think that should have been, just removed just like that?
You see, how do I start? Let me say, in the first place, there are exceptions to every rule. If you look across the world, there are certain persons who went into the university and graduated at age 12. Those are geniuses. Age 14, the best set of, the brightest set of students we are told in the world live in the UK, the Mafidon family from Edo State. All right, they are all geniuses. Those are exceptions. Now, but if you follow the rule, all right, I remember when we were growing up, there used to be what you call double promotion. If you did well in primary 3, in this same Nigeria, they will ask you to skip primary 4 and take you to 5. They recognized exceptions right now. All right, so they moved you. So if you moved like that, all right, at 16, 17, you will be at the secondary school. So do we keep you at home because you are not yet 18? No, in my view. If you have gone through the system and you are 16, all right, if we take, let's do some mathematics. We do it together. If at age 6, you get into a primary 1, and then you do 6 years, you should get out at 12. All right? But these days, we find our children leaving the primary school at 10. So that reduces it already. Okay, so by the time they finish secondary school, some are 15, some are 16. Except that child is very bright. Let the child just follow due process, because there's also mind development. Some come into the university very young, very green, and in their year 1, they are at a loss. They cannot cope with the environment. So they perform poorly in year 1.
All right. You've answered my question very diplomatically. You're not saying yes, you're not saying no. I mean, I'm wondering if there's a reason to that. Do you think it should have been, left at 18, but maybe room for exceptions, which will be very clearly spelled out?
I don't know whether we should legislate that it should be left at 18. I believe that we should allow the system, the different institutions, different states with their peculiarities to stand. Yes, you see, because if you then legislate, once you then say 18 is the minimum, what happens is that persons will simply look at 18 and say, look, you are not 18, you can't come in, no matter how well you have performed. That is my worry. It is our interpretation of the law. That's the reason. Yes, our interpretation, when you say you must be 18, and then you present your child in the university for admission, they say, no, it's not yet 18. Say, look, this child did well in the school certificate in JAM.
I get the point. Can I quickly ask you, because you already mentioned Unilag, and you did mention the fact that they're doing renovations, and first semester is going to be conducted via, let's say, Zoom or online, so to speak. I'm wondering what's the policy, because initially we had heard that, Unilag was taking off the central grid as a result of, there were electricity issues, so to speak. Can you tell us what the situation is now? Has that been resolved?
Well, I do know. I'm not a member of management, so I don't have the details of how it was resolved. But what I know is that with this Band-Aid thing, Unilag started paying more. All right. The rates of increase was not comfortable for the universities across the country. It's not only Unilag. All right. So there's power rationing that goes on in all the universities. So to that extent, it has not been resolved. The principle, the point that should be made is that the universities are not business enterprises. The university is a social service, and government provides support for these institutions. So if you then begin to charge the university the band-aid thing and say you're going to pay millions and we don't get that subvention from the government, then there is a problem. The universities ought to have power 24 hours. There are some researches that could just go wrong because power went off for 1 hour, for 2 hours. Oh yes. So they are paying more. I can boast about that power supply is higher than most institutions across the country. Power supply is good. It's steady. We'll have occasional hiccups when there is a national grid collapse. It affects UNILAG, but overall, UNILAG has done very well in terms of power supply to the university system, both in the residential and in the classroom. So if I may, I don't know the details of how it was resolved, but I just know that now that the situation has improved. Of course, except I'm in administration, I may not have those details.
That's okay, Prof. Thank you so much. Let me quickly hand this back to Ayo.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Prof, and thank you, Mark, for that. Well, Prof, this is the beginning of conversations. Now that you have had that conversation with Mark, who is your student, I guess some other citizens in Delta State who were your citizens and students as well would like to have it with you as well. Professor Hope Eghagha is a former commissioner in Delta State and is also a lecturer in the University of Lagos. Thank you for your time this morning. Okay, from education to business with Ine.